Welcome to the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Ferguson, and I am your host. I'm a house flipper. I flip 10 to 15 houses a year. I own 13 rental properties with a goal to buy 100 by 2023. I'm also a real estate agent. I've been licensed since 2001. I run a team of 9. We sell close to 200 houses a year. So on this show, we like to interview house flippers, landlords, and the best real estate agents in the business. So stay tuned for some great shows. If you want more information on my rentals, on the numbers, how I buy properties, check out investformore.com. Hey everyone, Mark Ferguson here with Invest for More. Welcome to another episode of the Invest for More Real Estate Podcast. I have a really cool guest on today, Chad Carson, who I've known for a little while. He's been an investor owning rental properties, flipping for many years. He also used to be a football player, which I find very interesting as a sports fan. And as a Bronco fan, I'm into football a lot right now. But yeah, really happy to have Chad on the show. Chad, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, Mark. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being on the show. I really like talking to investors, of course, and different investors and how they've used strategies to build up their passive income and also flipping. You've got some really cool goals, but I'd love to start with, how you got started in real estate. I know you went to Clemson on a football scholarship. So how did you get started in real estate after going through that?
Yeah. So with me, it was kind of a story like maybe a lot of people getting out of high school or getting out of college. You're just trying to figure out what you're going to do in your life. And you have all these little crossroads. And I was actually a biology major in college. And so it was biology and German of all things. And so it's kind of pre-med type path. But I started looking at it, and that was one path. And I applied to a bunch of med schools, and I started just thinking about the structure and the rigidness of that kind of career where you just had to go for 8 years or 10 years, and you finally start making money, and you're sort of locked into something for decades. And I didn't necessarily write it off, but I said, I'm just going to put that off for a little while. And I also had some opportunities like working for some bigger businesses and kind of Wall Street kind of stuff. And both of those were really cool. And they were kind of the traditional paths because you make a bunch of money and it was pretty secure. But I was really enticed by the entrepreneurship path, the idea that you could go start your own business, and it was exciting, and I knew nothing about it. And it was it's sort of like that sports feeling of just that big challenge and the excitement of going after a big goal. And so I plunged into real estate investing sort of with that much knowledge in it. My father owned a few rental properties growing up, so I was familiar with it. I really just said, I own my car free and clear, and I've got $1,000 in the bank. And I just started learning and reading and jumped into it with a business partner, a guy I knew in college. And the two of us have been, flipping and getting after it ever since then. But that was sort of the motivation at the very beginning.
No, that's great. And I'm curious, did you look at other businesses wanting to be an entrepreneur? Did you research, other ways to make money? What drew you to real estate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I really didn't. And I think a lot of it had to do with observing my father growing up. And I knew real estate was interesting. I'd always complained about it when I was in middle school because my dad used to overpay me, I think it was like $8 or $10 an hour, but I was totally not worth it as a painter. And I would have to paint some of his properties, and he would buy a foreclosure at the courthouse steps. You didn't know what was inside, so we'd get it, and you'd have to. Sometimes I was cleaning out refrigerators with maggots in it, and rats were running after you in the house. And I was like, "This is ridiculous. I would never want to invest in real estate." And then you grow up and you get out of college, and you're like, "Well, Dad was pretty smart after all." And so that was sort of the reason I looked at it and said, "This is a pretty intriguing business." And he actually had some books and seminars and things on his shelf. And so I was just thumbing around trying to just reading it, sitting in his office one day. And I got the bug just by reading some of those books, and I got excited about it. So I really didn't look at any other avenues except for that.
No, that's great. And real estate really is one of the easier ways to, start a business without much capital and without a ton of experience. So that makes sense. How did you do your first deal with $1,000 in the bank?
Yeah. So I know a lot of people talk about wholesaling. I've done a lot of wholesaling in the past, but I sort of took a different tact on that because I didn't have any money. I would just graduate from college. I didn't even have a place to live because I was just trying to figure it out. And so I actually lived at home in Noonan, Georgia, where I'm from, where my father invests. And so my first year, the plan was I just asked him, I asked him about deals. I started saying, what do the numbers look like? What kind of properties are you going after? I'd like to learn more about your business. And as he explained some of that to me, it kind of came to mind that I'd read somewhere about a bird dog, just somebody who goes out and finds deals for other people. And I asked that. I gave a proposition to my dad. I said, what if I hustled? I said, I don't know a lot at the moment, but I'll go out and hustle. I'll knock on doors. I'll talk to every realtor in town. I'll send out letters. I don't care what I need to do. But if you'll tell me what you're looking for, I'll go find it. I'll go sniff it out. And so that was a really good way for me to get started because, when you know nothing at that point, you're going to have a learning curve. And it sort of isolated just one part of the business that I could focus on. And that was just lead generation, bird dogging. That was it. And I didn't have to worry about the money. I didn't have to worry about how to rent the properties. I didn't have to worry about how to fix them up and flip them. All I needed to know was I'm going to learn. I'm doing the very beginning of the funnel. I'm just going to go out and sniff out deals. And it was really a kind of learning in motion. And I helped him it took about 4 or 5 months to get my first deal. But then I made a couple $1,000 per deal. I passed them on to him. Sometimes I helped him, along the way, flipping them or, marketing them or whatever. But then by the end of that year, I'd learned a lot. And I decided to then start doing it on my own because I knew how to find the deals. And so then I moved back up to Clemson where I went to college. And that's where my business partner and I got started. And we just started buying properties on our own using private money lenders who would just step in. Instead of me wholesaling it to somebody else, I just would find the lender who put up the money and then I would buy it myself.
That's awesome. And I know what you mean about wholesaling. There's a lot of gurus out there, a lot of people teaching wholesaling is an easy way to get started in real estate with no money, no credit, and it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy at all. No. But one thing wholesaling does do is it teaches you how to find deals, which is one of the most important things of real estate.
Yep.
The way you started was a great way because it probably taught you one of the most important things that you can do, and that was finding the deals.
Exactly. And I've kind of felt like that ever since then, that as long as I can find good deals, and if they're truly good deals, they're not just on paper, and I mean, they're the kind of deals that have equity, real meat on the bone, they have real cash flow, that you truly can go find the money if you have the deal. And that's been proven over and over again to me that, I kind of started in a little bit unorthodox way that I didn't have the traditional job and I didn't have credit to go to the bank and get loans. But because I was able to use that one skill that you're talking about, I was always had something to bring to the table because there were lots of people with money and no time and no expertise, but there weren't that many people, and there still aren't today, believe it or not, who are willing to go out and hustle and dig and kind of go in the little nooks and crannies where nobody else is looking. I mean, there's always those nooks and crannies. And so if you're willing to take that extra effort, I feel like that's a really good thing to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I'm curious, what do you think was your most successful way to find those deals?
Yeah, I used a variety, but I've always stuck with direct mail over the years. And so a lot of I did buy a lot of REOs at that point. So I like REOs and I like buying. I think you do a lot of those too, right, Mark? Because being with your background. And so I still like that because it was a really low cost way to get started. I didn't have to put up all the money for direct mail and have some failed campaigns that never brought anything in. But I guess the combination of that and then direct mail to different lists was really helpful for me because it sort of gave me that diversity of leads. Because some years it worked, the direct mail to, for example, an expired listing list or direct mail to a out-of-town owner list worked like gangbusters. And then the next year it didn't work at all. And so I would always have at least 2 or 3 different campaigns going. And those have been pretty consistent for me.
No, that's great. And I use some direct mail too, but it's hard for me to focus on it with a ton of different things going on. But it has given us some good results too. And I think some people get the misconception about direct mail. You just send out one letter and then you get a couple of leads and buy a house from it. But it doesn't work that way. I mean, how many letters do you send out to people, and how many contacts do you think you have to make before you can get one deal?
Yeah, so my direct mail has evolved a lot. I'm much more pinned today, and my business is different than it was 10, 12 years ago. But when I'm really getting my volume up, you have to send out thousands of letters. And my typical response rate is I might send out, for example, 1,000 letters and get a 3% response rate maybe. And so, you're going to get 30 calls, and then you're going to get out of those 30, maybe 10 of them will be worth going on an appointment. And maybe at 1 or 2 of those are going to be good deals. That's sort of a round number way to look at it.
Right. And those 1,000 letters aren't free either. You've got to pay for postage and to create them. So it can be expensive to do a direct mail campaign for sure.
Yeah, you can figure $1 per letter, and I outsource all my letters when I do that. But between stamps and paying somebody to do it and the cost of envelopes, it's a pretty big, especially for a brand new person, that's a pretty big investment, especially if those 1,000 letters don't work. If you sent it to the wrong list or your letter wasn't really good or whatever. I'd say it's like a second or third level, kind of a little bit more advanced strategy. I think there's some other ways that I really enjoy and things that like today I still do. I've never stopped doing like just driving around neighborhoods and bird dogging myself or having other people do the same thing. And like I really enjoy just picking out in my target neighborhoods. I'll pick out and make a list of properties that are vacant or that I just think are really cool properties that would be a good investment, or properties where the zoning is kind of in favor of, like it's a single family house on a multi-unit zoning or something, and just pick out those properties and make a list and send direct mail to those targeted lists of people. I think that's sort of an awesome way to do it. You really narrow down your market and then you just continually send letters to that smaller list of people. That's another good way to do it.
Right. It's when we talked to Bob Butcher last week, who does the same exact thing in Massachusetts. He said, it's so much more targeted. They get so much better results if you put that extra work in to actually, drive around or hire someone to drive around and find those houses that look vacant or dilapidated, not just because you have a better chance, but because there's so many other investors mailing to the absentee owners, the other lists. There's just a lot less competition if you put that extra work in.
Exactly. Yeah. And the other thing, direct mail is it's an art that people study for years. And so if you really don't get your letter right, or if you really don't get your envelope right, there's so many different tweaks you can do. And so I think that what you're just saying there gives you a competitive advantage, because those big firms that can send out 10,000 letters at a time and they have a marketing person on board, they're going to really hone their message and they're going to adapt it better than you are typically as a small operator. And so what you're saying, when you drive around and find those properties, that's the work, that's the hustle that the other investors aren't willing to do. And there's always those little things. And even better, if you can get out in the neighborhood and knock on doors and talk to neighbors and do some of that, that you can never outsource relationships and people and conversations. And so I've always found that's the thing that is kind of my moat or my barrier, or that is competitive advantage around what I do, is just have relationships with people. That's something that people can't do with 10,000 letters.
Right. No, that's great advice. That's something too that people can do that may not have a lot of money, but they've got time. Like when you first started out, you can go out there, talk to people, drive around, and it doesn't cost you that much money.
No.
And if you're just willing to do it and talk to people, it gives you a huge advantage.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. So you start working with a partner. What made you want to work with a partner and get involved with somebody else in your business?
It's something that other people have asked me that, and it's not something I recommend wholesale to people to get a partner, but it's worked out really, really well with us. And the original motivation was we combined financial resources a little bit. So I had, $1,000 in the bank, and he had a little bit more money for some marketing up front. But we also saw it as a way to scale our business a little bit with a little bit less risk. And so I was the acquisitions person. I was the person who was always working on getting money for deals when we started flipping houses. And he was the one who would manage the rehab, sort of our project manager, rehab manager, got all the subs out, got all the bids. And then he would also manage selling it or renting it, depending on which one we did. And so it allowed us to be really efficient early on and able to scale to the point where by 2007, so we started in 2003 together. And so within 3 or 4 years, we bought 50 deals in 1 year, which was just crazy for us. But we did that a lot because we were able to be more specialized. And once we bought a house, I didn't even see it for another 2 or 3 months until we sold it, or maybe not ever see it again. And so we just sort of had a pipeline going. And then I would have some people working with me and some acquisitions assistants, and he would have the contractors. So I think for that reason, it was good. And as we've evolved, we transitioned, and where he's not working as much day to day in the business as I am. So I'll take a salary in the business. He's still an owner, but then he's had capital from some other businesses that he's been able to invest with us. And so we've aligned in a lot of ways, but I'm not sure that, that's as easy to replicate for everybody. We've had some pretty good consistent values. We had consistent goals with each other. And it's just been a kind of a good thing for us.
Well, that's great. It's worked out so well. I'm curious, one thing you mentioned was how to decide whether to sell or rent. And I know a lot of people ask me that question. What parameters or criteria do you use to decide if you're going to rent or flip a property?
Yeah. So early on, it was different than it is now. But like early on, it was flip everything for us. I mean, every single property, if we could sell it, we would. Primarily because we were doing it as a full-time business. That's how we put food on the table. And so for the first 3 or 4 years, it was all flips just because we didn't have any capital to save for rental properties. We didn't have enough reserves. And so we just felt like we just needed cash. Once we were able to get a little bit more of a cash base, the rental properties for us were more, we would prefer to, after 2 or 3 flips a year, we would actually prefer to rent properties mainly because we felt like the tax advantages and wealth building advantages were better. You know, if we just, for example, if we flipped a house and we'd already flipped 3 or 4 houses before that extra flip, if we made 20 grand on that flip, our tax bracket was typically higher. We paid more in taxes. We had to pay FICA taxes often on that. And so if we held it for a couple of years, rented it out, and decided to sell it sometime in the future, then even if we did want to cash in on that property, we were paying a 15% or 20% or a much lower tax rate. And so we were able to keep more of the money. That was one of the first considerations we started thinking about, was just, hey, can we do less work and squeeze more money out of each deal? And that made sense with rental properties. But it also made sense kind of long term because our main goal was to have recurring passive income. And we didn't want to have to keep working. I wanted to take trips. We wanted to have flexibility to do other projects. And so at some point we knew we wanted that recurring income that came from rental properties. And so we sort of saw it like we were farmers, and the flip properties were like cash crops. That was like the crop you plant in the spring, you harvest it in the fall, and you keep doing those so you can eat. But then the long term, like the fruit trees that we were planting were like these apple trees, these long-term cash flow properties that they took a little while to grow. They didn't produce any fruit in the first few years, but after 4 or 5, 6 years, they start really producing some good cash flow, and you get them paid off. And then those fruit trees produce income. They produce money and fruit for you to eat for the rest of your life.
Well, that's a great analogy. And plus, you don't have to spend as much time with the fruit trees after you get them established as the cash crops. So
exactly, yeah.
Great. And how many rental property units are you guys up to now?
So we have about 55 units, and a small number of those are like notes that we've owner financed properties to people in the past. But most of what we have are rental properties. And I'm in a college town, so a big number of those now are college student rentals, and close to campus on the bus lines. And so that's kind of a different niche of real estate, but it's been pretty good for us because the university's been growing, and we've had basically zero vacancy for the last 5, 6 years on some of those properties. So it's been pretty good, and rents have been going up. So that's been an interesting niche.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I live in a college town as well. Most of my rentals are still single family homes, not rented to college students. But my sister actually has rentals as well, and she's always been in the college rental niche. So what tips or advice can you give about dealing with college students and renting to college students?
Yeah, so you're going to need to babysit a little bit more. That's part of the issue. But I think one of the things is just having some good systems. I have some single family rentals like you do too, Mark, and I find those are much more. They can self-manage a little bit better. If you get a family in there and they stay for 7 years, that's really an awesome management arrangement because they can cut their own grass. They can do a lot of things themselves. So student rentals, you're going to need to have some pretty good turnover systems because they turn over every couple of years. And so we just having checklists, having operation manual, having some good advertising channels that you can make sure students are able to find out about your rentals, have a good website. It's just a little bit more of a business operation than a maybe a little bit more passive rental operation might be. But it's been a good exchange for us because we have a part-time employee who works with us, and she can handle a lot of those systems and operations, and this made more cash flow for us over the long run.
That's great. And that's okay. Something I was going to ask is, are you managing these yourself or someone on your team helping manage them? How do you handle the management of those properties?
We started off so my business partner did a lot of it himself, and then I moved into a role for a while and did it myself. But then we think it's been 7, 8 years ago now, we hired a part-time bookkeeper to just do our kind of check our mail and do some things like that and just kind of file paperwork and do some basic bookkeeping. And she did a really good job, and she's grown into a bigger role where eventually we started letting her do all of our collections. Like if somebody was not paying on time, we'd let her call them and text them and track them down to get the money. And then she grew even more into more roles where she's sort of been our assistant, like going out and putting out rental signs and putting ads for our rental properties and then that sort of thing. So she's helped us do a lot of that and kind of evolved from more of a bookkeeper into an administrative assistant kind of role. And so that's been a really big help. And we sort of lean on her for some of the kind of the core just administrative tasks of management. And I still do the underwriting of our tenants when they come through, but sign the final lease and that sort of thing. But then she does I'd say 90% of it. And then that allows us to have a little bit more flexibility and kind of do everything else we need to do.
Oh, that's great. And yeah, when I started letting someone on my team handle the management, it made my life so much easier. It's
amazing.
Yeah, the more people I hire and hand off the stuff I don't like doing, the more I get done and the happier I am. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, you have a lot of systems. I mean, I know reading your stuff too, Mark. I mean, having those checklists and systems that allow you to hand off whatever you're doing, that's a powerful way to kind of generate income while still having some controlling your time a little bit, right? I mean, that's just it's an amazing way to do it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm not a super organized person all the time. People may think I'm just amazing, detailed, organized person. And I'm more of a big picture thinker. Yeah. And then what I've done is tried to hire people who are more organized than me to do that stuff. So it works out well that way. But the more systems you can get in place, even for your own personal life and time management and everything you do, the more you'll get done and the more efficient you'll be, and usually the happier you'll be too.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Now, something that I find interesting is, you started back in the early 2000s and you're still going strong. Did your area get affected by the housing crisis, and how did you get through that?
Yeah, so it did get affected. I think it was. So I'm in the upstate of South Carolina, and we're not a major metro area like Atlanta, Charlotte, but we're halfway in between those major metro areas. And so to some extent, like we never experienced like the massive growth that a lot of the big metro areas like Denver and Atlanta and Charlotte and all the big cities. And so we never got to like the peak that everybody else did. But we also didn't experience like the massive drop like everybody else did. And so, but we did, but it was a little bit delayed, and we definitely had some issues, and we had the same banking issues that everybody did where you couldn't go get money to refinance or whatever. But I think we did some things that some of it was a little bit lucky, and some of it was maybe being just smart and thinking about things. But I mentioned in 2007, we really had a big growth year where we had 50 acquisitions closings in 1 year. And some of those were flips. A lot of those were flips. Some of them were wholesales. Some of them were buy and hold rental properties. And we decided after that year to sort of slow down and say, we just need to absorb what we have. And so that was a good move. And I credit mainly my business partner to that. That was another benefit of having a business partner. He was doing more of the management, and he said, we really need to kind of get our heads around the growth we've already experienced. Let's slow down for a little bit. That was a good move because that was right about the time things were getting ugly. But the other thing I think we did, which was a little bit luck, but is also, some intuition about the market, was we didn't have a lot of bank loans. Almost all of, I think I calculated at one point there, it was like 90% or 92% of the payments we had going out the door on any of the properties we had leverage on were private financing. They were either seller financing, lease options, or self-directed IRA loans from individuals. And so the benefit of that, sometimes we paid a little bit higher interest, sometimes we didn't. But the benefit of that was we had a little bit more flexible terms. Most of those lenders were willing to give us 7, 10, 15-year terms that kind of let us ride out the storm and kind of get through everything. But it also gave us peace of mind that in the worst case scenario, even if we did have a balloon or some loan we had to pay off, I would much rather sit face to face over coffee with one of my private lenders and talk about the situation and say, hey, look, we're working our tails off to get this right, but right now we can't sell this property. Can you give me a little bit more time, or can I give you more of the cash flow on the back end? Can I give you a piece of equity in the property? So like an individual is going to have that flexibility, Whereas the stories I've heard, kind of the disaster stories from people I knew in town, people I've heard on the radio, like Dave Ramsey and some of the bigger personalities who don't like going in debt at all, they all borrowed bank money. And when the things got bad, the banks weren't willing to negotiate. And so I feel like that was another thing that we sort of had to do that because we didn't have a job and we didn't have a lot of income to go get a lot of bank loans. We had a few, but it was sort of something we ran with once we started doing it.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people got in trouble with the banks because not just getting bank loans, but they're getting short-term bank loans with balloon payments where, if things go wrong, the bank can say, hey, pay us all our money or we're going to take the property or whatever. But if you invest with long-term bank loans without balloon notes, you're usually a lot safer. So, there's a big difference between the type of bank loans you're getting.
Yes, good point. Yeah, the 30-year mortgage at 4% is much different than a 6% or 5% commercial loan with a 3-year balloon. And if you had 20 of those commercial loans and they all burst at the same time, that's a problem.
Right, exactly. And there's no guarantee prices will go up or you'll be able to refinance those. And that's what I think a lot of people banked on, was that prices would just keep going up, or they could just continually refinance all their properties. And when things changed, a lot of that money just disappeared for a couple of years.
Exactly. Yeah, it dried up. Even if you were a good borrower, even if you had good credit. I mean, I tell people, look at what happened to all the big corporations who were like Fortune 500 corporations. The Goldman Sachs and GE and Bank of America had to go to Warren Buffett because they couldn't get enough money. If those biggest companies in the country are having a hard time getting money during a downturn, you think you and I, as a kind of mom and pop investor, are going to be able to go to the bank and get money? I mean, it doesn't work that way. But the other thing that I found that was sort of fortuitous about using some non-bank financing was the best time to buy deals was 2008, 9, 10, right? And that was when it was really difficult to get bank money. But that was actually the time when a lot of the investors who invested with me were also sort of panicking about the stock market, and they were getting 0% interest on a CD. And so it was sort of a perfect storm because I'd already built relationships with those people. They didn't have a place that they felt good about to put their money. And here I was finding really good deals, produced amazing income. And I would go to them and say, hey, look, there's a good piece of real estate. You'll be in it for 60% loan to value or 70% loan to value. And it produces a ton of income. If I got run over by a bus, you could take the property back and be in really good shape. And so it was just a really easy proposition once you built that relationship with people to say, let's go buy some properties now. And you had cash to go do it when everybody else didn't.
Right. No, that's great. And I'm really curious too. You've had quite a few units, quite a few flips going on. Obviously, you've had a ton of private money that you could borrow. How did you find those private money lenders in the beginning?
It all just started, it's kind of like I was talking about going out and finding deals and sort of talking to people. It was sort of like that. And the first one, I guess, is always the hardest one. And my first private lender was a professor I met at Clemson. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do right when I graduated, I went and took a business course, and it was a biology major, so I wanted to learn a little bit more about business. And I met the professor in class was talking about real estate. And so it kind of perked my ears up, and I stopped after class and talked to him. And next thing I knew, I was riding around in the car with him looking at real estate deals, after class. And eventually he put me on some projects and said, why don't you go research this and this and this? And I didn't even have to go to class anymore. He gave me special projects on the side looking at real estate. And it took about a year, but after I worked with my dad and was a bird dog for my dad, that year I moved back to Clemson. I went to him and said, I'm finding these real estate deals, but I need the money. I don't have any money. Is there any way we could work together? And so we worked out a way where he would put up the money and we'd pay him an interest rate typically. Sometimes we'd give him a piece of the equity on the back end as a lender. So he would have a participating loan. And so he was basically like an angel investor in the venture capital world, where he would kind of take a chance on a new young upstart investor, but he would make a bigger profit by doing that. And then over time, once I had that one relationship with him, I would meet other people at RIA meetings and around town, and I would tell them about what I was doing with him, and they got interested in that too. And so I was able to develop a little circle of people who would loan me money that way. And I learned a lot about self-directed IRAs, and that helped a lot because I became sort of an expert on how that process worked, at least how to how to get the loans set up and closed and that sort of thing. And so I could explain that to somebody who had a big 401k and wanted to invest in real estate. I would say, well, you could call this company over here. They could put $100,000 in a self-directed IRA, and you could loan it to me and make 6% or make 10% or whatever I was borrowing at the time. And so I would help them figure that out.
Oh, that's awesome. And one thing I think that's unique with what you've been saying is you've been able to get some long-term private money financing. I mean, most people I talk to, even for myself, a lot of private money, they might lend you money for a year or two, but it sounds like you've been able to establish some longer-term private money loans, right?
Yeah, and it started off short-term, though. That was the interesting thing. I was doing all those flips early on, and my professor friend, he just did short-term with us for a long time. But eventually we started, especially when the downturn came about, we started saying, look, the opportunity is in holding property. And would you be interested in just earning a guarantee, just an income stream instead of having this money come in and out and in and out? How about you have some of your money just sit there for 10 years and make a set interest rate, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. You could just use that income to do whatever. And so it sort of evolved into that, and we started showing them some other deals where they would just make income. And I think the key for them was that we had already established that trust. And so it might be that with private lenders, you might want to do a couple deals where you pay them off quickly in 6 months, 12 months. But then on the next, maybe on the third deal, you offer them and say, here's another deal. It's a rental property. It produces $2,000 a month in income. I'm going to be paying you $1,000 and you're going to be at a 70% loan to value. Would you be interested in that kind of deal if you loaned me the money over 10 years or maybe 7 years? And you just sort of lay it out there and compare it to the alternatives. Because I know you know this too, Mark, when you compared it to what they could do in the stock market, many people in the stock market are expecting 7% over the long run. And so if you can show them they can make 6% and just with an interest payment, and it's a lot more, it's passive, it's more stable. They already like real estate. To me, it's not a illogical proposition for them to go for a 6% return over 10 years instead of 7% in the stock market, especially if they're a real estate person who knows and likes real estate.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes perfect sense to me because there's no guarantee the stock market's going to give you back 7%. It might be more, it might be less, but it could be negative returns too.
Yeah.
And you got nothing backing a stock market investment either. If you lose your money, there's no house that you could take back if you lose your money.
Exactly.
Real estate is backed by a real asset, and like you said, you've got steady return coming in, which the stock market, there's no guarantees at all.
No, exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. And now, what has intrigued me, we talked a little bit before we started, is you've got your rental properties, you're still flipping some homes now, but your goal is to retire basically next year, right?
Yeah, and so retire is kind of a loaded word, but yeah, exactly, I am. So my wife and I are planning on taking a mini retirement trip, but we're really, the goal, it has a couple main goals. One is we're going to go abroad for a year. We have 2 little girls, so we have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old daughters, and so we want to just sort of settle down in one location in a Spanish-speaking country. My wife speaks Spanish and is a Spanish teacher. And so we just want to sort of immerse ourselves and get an apartment down in Argentina in a big city there and just sort of live local life, learn more Spanish, have a good time, sort of just take ourselves out of our normal life for a little while. And the cool thing about that is I'm a goal person, and to do that kind of thing financially and with your business, it forces you to get all your income in place. So you have to have enough passive income coming in to fund that trip. But I think the more difficult part is detaching yourself from all the systems and to the processes you've made. And so that's my business partner and I are working a lot this year on making sure our payment system. So how are we going to pay contractors if I'm abroad in Argentina? And how are we going to do paperwork? How are we going to communicate with people? And so it's just forced us to build a better business, knowing that it's time to go. We got to get out. We're going to be leaving the country. And so it's a really fun process for many reasons. First of all, because it's just going to be a really cool trip and a family trip and sort of just a lifetime kind of experience. But it's also going to be sort of getting us to the next plateau of our business in terms of passive income, in terms of passive systems and delegating and outsourcing things.
No, that's awesome. And I love how you have set it up so that, yeah, you're kind of forcing yourself to make a business self-sufficient without you being there.
Right.
Which, it should be the goal of every business owner, is that you create something where you don't have to work it all year long to make money, but it actually makes money without you. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's in real estate, it seems like it's such a local business, and a lot of people give you an objection. You might hear this too, Mark, that it's, you got to be local. You got to be there and look at the property. But I mean, I've done this in the past. I took a little mini retirement in 2009, and when my wife and I, before kids, went to South America. And I remember vividly being on the Magellan Strait in southern Chile in Patagonia. And I was in this little internet cafe, and I had my little small laptop, and I was checking my email briefly because we were about to go on a tour, look at like a penguin colony right there on the very tip of South America. And I'm on Skype talking to a plumber because I'd gotten an email about a hot water heater blowing up and it was leaking in the crawl space. And so I got on Skype for like 10 cents a minute and called this plumber. I was on the phone for three or 4 minutes. He said, okay, I know what to do. I'll handle it. I'll pay for it. We'll bill you later. He went and handled the hot water heater. I was off the phone in 3 or 4 minutes, and I went on to my tour of the penguin colony and had a good time. So in a worst case scenario, real estate can be very mobile if you can, even in those kind of situations, even if you're handling maintenance yourself, it requires a phone call. And the way digital, the technology and internet works these days, this is a really cool business, owning rental property, to be able to be mobile, to be able to be self-sufficient. It's just never been a better time if you want to kind of detach yourself from your normal life and kind of move around a little bit. This is a really good way to do it.
That's awesome. And yeah, I've talked to a number of people who are investing from across the country or even out of the country. And yeah, because of today's technology, they can see pictures, they can see videos, they can see properties. I mean, it obviously helps to be local, at least see where you're investing once in a while, but you don't have to be there percent of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can come in and out of town, and you want to be back at some point. I don't think you ever want to be detached, but the point is, if you can venture off into new, greener pastures for a little while, and to me, that's part of the fun of life. I mean, trying new things, having new adventures. Real estate kind of gives you that bedrock, that foundation that allows you to venture off. And if you compare that to other lifestyles that people have, grinding away at a job for 50 years or for 30 years, or having to get up every morning and commute and do the same thing with somebody else's schedule. I mean, that gets old. This always requires work, but it's a kind of work that's flexible and it has plateaus that you can kind of take time off. It has flexibility to do other things, to grow. So it's a really, I'm obviously sold on the vehicle of real estate investing, but I'm kind of a evangelical about it, almost telling people about it, because it's just such an amazing way to build your life around it.
Right. And that's one thing I was going to ask you about too is, you've been in real estate, about 13, 14 years or around there?
Yeah, 13 years now. Right.
Yeah. So how long, if you would have taken the biotech route, do you think it would have taken you to be able to take a trip for a year to another country like this?
Yeah. I can't even imagine, Mark. I don't know that it would have happened. I think the way it works is you get momentum in your life and you go down a certain path and you start acquiring debt to go to medical school, and just one thing leads to another. So I don't know that I'd be doing it. I mean, I would like to think that maybe I'd make a lot of money as a doctor and save that money and kind of jump out of that ship eventually. But I feel like if you put off getting into entrepreneurship, the longer you do that and you don't get to taste that flexibility and sort of taste the Kool-Aid, so to speak, you might keep putting it off for another decade and another decade. And I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing if I would have gone that path.
Right. No, that's one reason why I love real estate as well. Well, that's great. Do you have any plans after Argentina, or are you just kind of taking it as it goes and see what happens?
Yeah, I'm just taking it as it goes. I mean, I sort of see it like a new shift for me. Even right now, we're looking at bigger deals than we did in the past in Clemson, where I am. I'm sort of like a big fish in a small pond. It's a small town, but it's really growing fast. And so we're looking at maybe some venture capital deals where we put some money in deals with other people, where we buy maybe a little bit bigger apartment units. We're looking at maybe doing some development deals if the numbers are right. So I think we're kind of shifting and looking. If we have a good base of rental properties, we can then pick and choose some really interesting opportunities that are kind of bigger deals. And I think that's kind of on the horizon for us. And then I like doing some of the same things you do as well. I like to write. I like to think. I like to share ideas with other people. And so the internet real estate world has been interesting for me to be able to exchange ideas with other people, to share ideas. I write a weekly newsletter, which is as much therapy for me because I think my wife got tired of me just explaining all these ideas and these cool things I read in a book. She said, "Why don't you just write it down and share it with other people?" and so that's what I've been doing that for a while as well. So I think I'll venture off into that in a bigger way.
Right. No, you have a great site, and tell people what your blog is, and you're welcome to tell us a little bit more about what you like to write about and what your plans are.
So my blog is called college..com, and that sort of originated. I used to do a little bit more consulting with people here locally, but I played sports, and so I always liked the idea of kind of your old school coach who was about fundamentals and who was about kind of teaching you the kind of core parts of the business and keeping you motivated. And so what I write about on coachcarson.com is very much about real estate investing and building wealth, but also get into a lot of the personal finance and early retirement and how do you balance your business and your life and kind of use real estate goals to accomplish some of the life goals that you have. And so I get into some of that and some of the I'm really interested in positive psychology and mindset and how you think about things and the ideas you put in your head. And so I touch on a little bit more. I definitely have a lot of real estate, but there's also some more of that kind of thing as well.
Oh, that's great. I'm the same way. I'm a huge believer in positive thinking and using our own subconscious to help us succeed more. I think people don't realize how much control we have over our life if we really put our mind to it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's amazing. It's kind of like that garbage in, garbage out analogy, that if you put garbage into your mind, if you were eating food, if you start eating Cheetos every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, eventually you're going to turn into a Cheeto. It's just not, that's not good for your body. Well, the same thing goes with your mind. I mean, there's been quotes, I think there's a quote by Marcus Aurelius who talks about your mind back in the Roman days. And he was a Roman emperor, the guy from Gladiator, and he was a philosopher as well. And he said that your mind is kind of like a cloth that gets dyed by a certain color. And the more you soak your mind in a certain kind of thought, your mind's going to turn into that. So if you're always thinking about negative things, or you're always thinking being pessimistic, or if you're always thinking about whatever it is, that's the way you're going to naturally be that way. And so a big part of the entrepreneurship in real estate, I think, is controlling that information that goes into your mind and deliberately thinking about the kinds of things you want to build. And so listening to podcasts like this, where you have people who are optimistic and building their own lives, I mean, that's part of it. You have to kind of hang out with people, whether it's virtually or in real life, who share some of the values and some of the aspirations that you do. And that's bound to rub off on you if you do that enough.
Right. No, that's awesome. I know we've been going a while here, but that just reminds me of people who think about start investing in real estate, or even are thinking about becoming a real estate agent. They listen to people who've never been in the business or have never done it, and they get discouraged because they tell them it's a bad business to be in. But if you're going to get involved in something, make sure you listen to the people who are actually doing it, and not somebody who has never done it before and is negative about everything. So,
That's right. Or somebody who's crashed and burned and who's pessimistic for the rest of their life about how that doesn't work. There's plenty of those people. But right. There's also the people who've crashed and burned who've come back. So you can find examples of whatever you want to find. I mean, find somebody who's done there's always somebody who's done what you're trying to do, or who's overcome what you're trying to overcome. I mean, that's the beauty of the internet, and there's millions of stories out there. So, find your story. If you resonate with Mark, that's why you listen to him. And you keep going with somebody like that who inspires you and who can show you a different way of thinking about life.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think those are all the questions I had for you, except for one last one. And I think you got started, like many people want to get started in real estate, without a whole lot of money, maybe not great credit, which I think the more money you can save, the better off you'll be. But, if someone has $1,000 in their pocket, they want to get involved in real estate, what do you think the best way for them to get started is?
Good question. So there's a lot of personal situations, but I love the idea of house hacking. And what I mean by that is using your personal residence somehow as a way to learn about real estate. And there's a couple of ways you can go with that. But it wasn't my first, but one of my first residences was I moved into a multi-unit property, a quadruplex. And, I had to live somewhere. And so I got the loan to buy the property and live there. And I learned more about rental properties by living there at the unit and having and I could sort of live through my mistakes that I made, because you're always going to make mistakes. But I learned a ton, and I also was able to live positive cash flow by renting out the spaces next to me. And I was actually living positive $200 or $300 a month. Instead of having $1,000 mortgage payment, I was getting paid to live in a rental property. And so if you're young and you're willing to, or young at heart and you're willing to do that kind of thing, I think that's a really cool way to do it. And there's so many ways to kind of hack your rental property. You can do Airbnb and rent a couple extra bedrooms. You can build a storage unit or a apartment unit over a garage. You can do, there's all sorts of ways to get started with that. But in rental properties in particular, I think that's one I recommend a lot to people, because you already have to have a place to live, and it's a really low risk way to get into the business.
Yep. Nope. I totally agree. I think that's an awesome way to get started. And a lot of people think there's some magic secret formula, but really, like you said before, if you learn the fundamentals well, that's where the success comes from. And one of those fundamentals is using low down payment owner occupant loans if you can.
Yes, exactly. That's the way to do it.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Chad, thank you so much for being on the show. If people want to get a hold of you, is coachcarson.com the best place, or is there another way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, that's it. Go to coachcarson.com. And if you go to on the front page there, I have my newsletter. You can subscribe there, and I have some free information that you could get when you sign up. And I also have a contact form there. You can, if you want to ask me a question or get in touch, you can hit contact, and that'll go directly to me.
All right. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show. Love talking about your journey. And I hope you have continued success and a lot of fun in Argentina. That'll be exciting. And yeah, thank you again.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. It was a pleasure being on.
All right. You have a great day.
You too.